the sounds and talent of the late, great Aretha Franklin, who I understand we lost over in the evening. Welcome to this month's free Friday webinar. My name is Michelle Mott, and we are delighted to have you join us on this August Friday afternoon. We know that many of you are busy with getting the kids ready for back to school, final vacation, so I applaud this group's dedication to joining us. This month, we're going to focus in on visionary leadership strategies, and in case you have any technical difficulties during this hour, they have updated the WebEx platform. It looks a little bit different, and we think it's much better. It seemed to be in the first hour much easier to operate, but if you need any assistance or questions after the fact, please jot down Dana's phone number, 515-221-2688. She is standing by and can help you out in any way possible. All right, well, let's, since we've got a couple of new folks joining us, let me give you a couple of tips for the WebEx platform. For instance, on the upper middle corner, upper part of your screen, you will see some controls. You can either zoom in or zoom out and show us full screen, whatever you feel comfortable with. And so many of our clients are telling us that they're sharing this webinar experience as an in-service. So feel free to think about not only watching it yourself, but projecting it on a screen and having it as a little quasi webinar for your entire organization. I also want you to know that we have archived the webinars, so each month out on our website, inspiringsolutions.com, you can go out and watch, listen to previous month's webinars. Secondly, you're watching the PowerPoint display. We're not going to be using any videos, but that's the way that you can fully enjoy the sights and the sounds. Up to the right-hand side, you'll see some panels where you can look at who has registered and are participating in our webinar. And the other box that I would encourage you to consider using, because it really makes it interactive, is the chat box. So for instance, you'll see where Dana had already typed in a good morning, wishing you a good Friday. And then what you can do is actually type in a message below the two and then hit enter, and it actually sends out the message just as I did for all of our reference. So either answer a question that I give to you, or if you've got a question you want to ask me or of Dana, feel free to type that in or send us a message afterwards. All right, well, the purpose of this hour is, again, to deliver some monthly motivation and expose you to one of our inspiring programs or products. And in this particular month, we're going to focus in on a new disc tool that some of you may not be familiar with, called the Everything Disc Work of Leaders. And the handouts that were attached to the instruction email were the Everything Disc profile itself, which is a sample that we're going to spend most of our time on. You'll also see a brochure where you can learn more about bringing this into your organization as a leadership development tool, or if it's something that you as a leader want to fill out yourself for your own leadership effectiveness. Then as always, we want you to be aware of and put dates for our upcoming webinars on your calendar and promote it to others. As you sign off at the end of this hour, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey, and please do so. It really gives us some great insights to what you enjoy, what you appreciate about this learning experience, as well as offer future topics. We have set the first 6 months of 2019, and we'll be using that. We'll be rolling that out next month, so you can start putting those dates and topics on your schedule. So let's get started with an introduction to this leadership development assessment. For those of you who are not familiar with using the online platform, let me just explain how it works. If you wanted to complete this profile for yourself, or maybe you wanted to do it for your leadership team, you would ask us to send each leader a unique link. That email would contain a unique link that you would go out and answer some questions about yourself as a leader. And after completing those questions, you would then be able to obtain a customized profile, much like that we sent to you that we're going to walk through today. So let's take a look at the example that we've given you of a gentleman named Denard Harris. Turn into page 2 of that profile. So if you're following along, feel free to mark it up as I do as we go through this. This first page gives you some generic information about the Everything Disc Work of Leaders profile. As I mentioned, it's a simple, customized tool that illustrates how you can improve your effectiveness as a leader. It does define leadership as a one-to-many relationships as opposed to one-on-one relationship that oftentimes managers do. If you are a leader of an organization, if you are the owner, if you are a senior leader where you impact and make decisions on behalf of the entire organization, we find this to be a very valuable tool. For instance, we have developed a leadership development series for HCA, the Hospital Corporation of America. And we use this tool as one of the modules, and it's very insightful for them to get an understanding of not only their relationship with their peers, other leaders, but how they impact the organization. Now, if you are more of a supervisor or a manager, this tool could be helpful, but the one that we're going to probably recommend more likely would be that called Everything Disc. It's Everything Disc Management Profile. So I will say, and I said this to the first hour, that this is a little more in-depth. It can be a little more complicated than the general disc profile. So buckle up, and I'll go as smoothly as I possibly can, as I did and I learned in the first hour, but I will encourage you to ask any questions in the chat box as we go through this profile. On the right-hand corner, you'll see some cornerstone principles. One thing that we want you to know is, as I mentioned, this is the steps directed towards leading a group or an organization. It tends to be appropriate for a leader at any level of the organization. So whether you're in a senior leadership position or whether you are in a leadership of a project or a committee, this you will find relevant. It tends to look at a variety of different factors of you as a leader, your characters, your life experiences, your cognitive abilities, as well as your maturity. Now, I'm not talking about your age, but I'm talking about your maturity or experience as a leader. And it does continue to challenge you to develop in your leadership success. So whether you're a new leader or an experienced leader, I think you will enjoy the benefits of this tool for your development. The other piece at the bottom that it is unique to this profile, different from the other DISC tools, is that it looks at a fundamental process for leaders in 3 steps or 3 areas. First is that of vision, second of alignment, and the third is execution. So that's where we're really going to spend a lot of the time so you can understand how this tool differs from other online leadership tools. If you are familiar with the Everything Disc family of tools, you'll know that it's a little bit different than the Disc Classic. The Disc Classic used bar charts. In other words, you were focused on the D, I, S, and C. And through years and years of research, Wiley has identified that everyone is a blend of all 4 of those different behavior styles. So they have created what's referred to as an interactive map. And much like a map, you are illustrated or you are described using a point or a dot, much like that of a dot, or much of that like a map. For instance, in general, this is what a map looks like. So you'll see the D standing for dominance, the I standing for influence, S for steadiness, and C for conscientiousness. And then as you think about the blend of those 4 different styles, you will see on the outer part of the circle 8 different priorities. So as a leader, you will display, for instance, one of the 8 priorities most of the time. For instance, If you have one woman, I'm going to start from the northern point, you might have someone who is on your team is very pioneering. She is a blend of DI. That tends to be more of my style. You might also have someone, or you might see yourself as being more energizing. This tends to be a more pure I leader. Affirming member on your team is a blend of I and S, and I would describe Dana in this manner. An inclusive style of leadership is that of someone who demonstrates more S behavior. A humble leader combines C and S behavior. A deliberate leader is primarily a high C, very conscientious. A resolute style leadership is a blend of D and C. And then commanding is one who tends to be predominantly a D-driven leader. So what does that look like in a customized profile? If you turn to page 3 in the sample profile, I want to introduce to you where the customization begins. You will see, as an example on this profile, a dot. And it says in there that the dot is made up of the 4 styles divided into 3 regions. And you'll see that the dot in Denard's Harris tends to be on the outer rim of the circle. And what that means is that when the dot is on the outer edge of the circle, he tends to put, or she will put a lot of energy in that particular behavior style. If it's more towards the center of the circle, that means that it is a moderately inclined behavior. Another way that I like people to think about it is that you tend to be more adaptable or flexible to whatever is needed in a particular relationship or a particular situation. Now, what that means in descriptive or narrative form is described in more depth on page 4. So what page 4 will describe is what your dot means to you in more of a narrative form. And so what I do is I coach leaders to take this really and customize it even more by putting a check mark next to things that you believe or agree with, put an X to something that maybe you don't agree with, and then a question mark or circle something that you question. And then ask somebody for feedback, because sometimes by asking a coworker, a fellow leader, or maybe one of your teammates, does this sound like me? You would be surprised to know how transparent your behavior might be without you knowing it. So that can oftentimes validate that this really, truly is spot on. So in kind of looking at the example of Denard's, you can see that where his dot is describes that he tends to be more results-oriented. He takes and initiates action with helping the group maintain its momentum. He tends to gain satisfaction from clearing the path through obstacles, doubts, and resistance. In other words, he enjoys challenges. The next paragraph talks about his competitive spirit, and therefore he has a high tolerance for conflict. He thinks conflict is just natural. The next talks about leaders with a high D style have a high level of confidence. And then the last says that his most valuable contribution as a leader may be his tendency to move quickly, speak with conviction, make tough decisions, and step up to the plate when the group lacks direction. In fact, these are probably some of the qualities that others admire most about his style of leadership. So I always like to say that if you were to think about writing a mission statement of you as a leader, that last paragraph would probably describe what you do best as a leader. Page 5, again, goes a little bit further into the DISC as it relates to the priorities. So as it relates to his dot, and I know it's hard on my screen to read what that says, it describes that what comes most natural to him is being commanding. And there's a definition of what that means on the lower half of page 5. But you'll also see some shading towards the other 3 or 4 areas around commanding, which means that he can also be pioneering, he can also be resolute, and then he's with the areas that is with the lines indicates that he can also trend toward being deliberate. That might be a stretch for him, and it might be because of his team's needs. So for instance, if he tends to be a commanding style leader, he's kind of, and sometimes he might be perceived as a bull in the china, and he might overstep his boundaries and might tend to be a little more demanding than what the team is ready for. So as a result of feedback from his teammates, he might find himself needing to be more deliberate. In other words, he can't take a abrupt change of course of action without being deliberate or articulate the reasons why. That makes some sense to you. So those pages would give you at a glance an overview of your DISC style of leadership. Then on the next page, for an overview of the DISC style, page 6, this is a quick reference for information on each of the different styles. So if you're not familiar or you don't know which of your behavior style is, this today could give you an understanding whether you are a high D. In other words, in the upper left-hand corner, it describes those that are high D display a dominant approach. Their priorities are described. They tend to get immediate results. They're motivated by power and authority. They fear loss of control in a situation or in a relationship. You'll notice as you interact with someone who's a high D, they are confident, direct, forceful, and a risk taker. However, if you are a D, you might need to be aware that you could demonstrate a lack of concern for other people, their feelings. They might be impatient, that's why we're doing them first, and they might be insensitive to others' feelings. On the opposite spectrum, or on the right-hand side, those of you who might feel that you are more of an I, you have a good ability of influencing others. It describes your priorities, expressing enthusiasm. You're motivated by social recognition. You fear social rejection. You will notice most likely they wear their emotions on their shirt sleeves. So you'll know if they're happy, if they're sad. They tend to be very talkative. And as a result of their greatest strengths, sometimes can also be their limitations. They may not give much thought to decisions and make decisions on impulse. They can be a little bit disorganized. Dana and I both have a degree of I, so we have to really concentrate on being organized. S's, and by the way, the majority of our workplace and our world are S's, so when you think about those whom you serve as well as those who you lead, their priorities are giving support. They want stability. They enjoy collaboration, so no wonder they appreciate a good leader who can collaborate and bring a team together. They're motivated by stable environments, which means if you are creating a culture of change, that's going to cause them a lot of stress. So you might need to realize that you need to communicate to give them that sense of security. They fear loss of stability, and you'll notice that they will demonstrate a lot of patience, a calm approach. They're probably the best listeners. And however, because of their style, some of their limitation is they tend to avoid or resist change. So it's no wonder if your organization is instilling or implementing change, why you are being met with such resistance. And the last but not least style of behavior are the high C's. They have a high degree of conscientiousness. Their priorities are to ensure accuracy. They want and make sure that everyone is honoring policies, procedures, playing by the rules. They're motivated to be able to use their expertise and their knowledge. They want everyone to pay attention to quality. They fear criticism. which could be if you're going to criticize their work, you better make sure that you have your facts straight because they take great pride in their work. In fact, yesterday I was at the dentist's office and there was a new office manager, and at a glance I was very impressed by the work area compared to the last office manager whose workspace was very cluttered, disorganized. This new office manager was very organized. There was not a piece of paper in front of her. She used obviously a lot of the technology to make appointments and communicate through emails or text messaging. They have the neatest workplace because they're organized. However, one of their limitations is they can be overcritical and tend to overanalyze themselves and their work. So did that give you an idea of which style you might be? If you know, I would love for you to, again, use the chat box and then type in the chat message area what style you are. It might be one of the four, or it could be a blend like I mentioned I am. So if you would be so kind to type in if you know your style, if you want to guess which style yours is. If you don't know, one of the things that we also teach in our class about DISC is how to read the styles of others. Active, are you active, fast-paced, or are you more thoughtful, moderate-paced? Are you questioning, skeptical, challenging, or more accepting? So that's, again, a way that you can understand not only yourself, but understand others. All right, Dana said that she's an I, but sometimes can lean towards a D or the S. And she makes a good point. No one is an absolute. Every one of you could demonstrate D, I, S, or C behavior depending on the relationship, depending on the conversation, depending on the situation that you're in. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, Dana. All right, so we're going to leave the DISC knowledge base, and now I'm going to introduce to you what I think is the most exciting part of this tool. I've used a lot of different leadership assessment tools, but I in particular like this because it talks about leadership from a process. On page 7 in your profile, you will see an overview of this work of leaders process. So let me teach you the language of the work of leaders. The first bar describes the 3 steps. So as a leader, the first step is that of crafting a vision. The second step as a leader is to make sure that you have alignment. So you've got the vision, now you need to make sure that everybody knows and follows the vision. And then the third step of a leader is to make sure that the work gets done. So in other words, follow through on the goals or the action. Now, underneath each of the columns, if you will see that there are 3 drivers. The 3 drivers of crafting a vision is exploration, boldness, and testing assumptions. So as you craft a vision, you're going to need to explore ideas. You're going to need to be bold and brave and actually taking some risks. And you also have to test your assumptions to make sure that you're making a good decision when crafting your vision. Now, underneath each of those 3 drivers is what's called a behavioral continuum. Those are 2 different ways of displaying exploration. And for instance, one extreme would be to remain open, and the other would be to prioritize the big picture. And I know that sounds a little bit cumbersome, but I want to help you to understand. And by completing this profile, you'll actually understand where you are in the area of best practices. Years and years of experience have looked at the effectiveness of leaders, and so we're going to give you an idea of what behavior has been found to be the most effective in leading an organization or leading a team. So let's take a look at the first step, and that is of creating or crafting a vision. To illustrate vision, I want to have you go back in time. Back in 1961, some of you on here, I don't know your ages, but I know some of you were born on that day, or not, or were born by then. But in 1961, May 25th, our president, JFK, illustrated his vision to put man in space, called or challenged our country for a lunar landing before the decade's end. And we rose to that challenge and actually were successful. I would encourage you, for those of you who remember what you were doing back on July 20th, 1969, when we broadcasted the first man on the moon. And if I did the math, I would have been 7 years old, so now you guys know how old I am. And that was a day before my 7th birthday, and most likely I would have been watching it at home on a black and white television set. So if you guys know or remember where you were, feel free to do a little stroll down memory lane and chat that in the message area. To kind of illustrate how visions are translated in a corporate setting, I want to illustrate visions from well-known organizations that you actually may have done business with. And what I'd like you to do is think about what the name of that organization that promoted it was. For instance, one organization crafted a vision to put a computer on every desk and in every home. That vision was crafted by Bill Gates, the leader of Microsoft. And I would be curious to know if that in fact is true, that if everyone has a computer on your desk and have at least one in every home. Oh, Tiffany, that's funny. Not on the planet Earth yet in 1969. That's funny. The next vision I want you to think about is what organization created a vision of having a video player suitable for home and use in both size and price. And again, Tiffany, you're not going to remember this, but this was Sony back in 1964 when they created the Walkman. Another vision was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, I know many of you have used this organization's craft when they've Googled. In fact, I, again, want you to think about how our world has changed since Google has basically put the encyclopedia salesperson out of business. How many of you still have an encyclopedia or remember back when we were in school and we had to do research by using an encyclopedia? Today's students, our learners, and we even do it on our own handheld computers, is we Google. If we don't know, we Google something. Another vision that an organization created, I'll ask you to think about, was when they wanted to build a place where people can come to find and discover anything they might want to buy online. How many of you have shopped online using Amazon? Amazon has not only changed our online shopping experience, being able to get it the day of, which is unbelievable, but they've put a lot of retail businesses out of business because of the convenience of shopping online. It's changed the world. I'm curious to know that if others were a part of this organization's vision was to bring girls out of their home environment to serve in their communities and experience the open air. How many of you were also a Girl Scout? And Tiffany, love my Google. You do. Another vision from an organization was to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. I'll give you a clue. They also have a motto of just do it. You were right if you guessed Nike. Another organization wanted to deliver happiness to customers, employees, and vendors. I've not had any experience with Zappos, and if you have, I would love for you to share using the chat box of what you have used or how you have been a customer of Zappos. So I want you to think about vision, not just for CEOs, but that of leaders at all levels of the organization responsible for crafting visions. You know, maybe you have to craft a vision for a project, that which supports the organization's vision. You can take a look at different, from top-down level visions, but are equally important. For instance, in our organization, Inspiring Solutions, one of our strategic initiatives was to improve our office efficiency. You know, who doesn't want to work smarter and not harder? And one way that we thought we should do that was to improve our CRM, our Client Relations Management System. We had been using ACT for probably 20 years. It's an application that had served us well, but it was becoming obsolete, and I wouldn't say it's obsolete, but it was just creating some challenges for our efficiency. And so one of our visions was to look at other options for our CRM. So I'm going to actually use that as a project that we've been pursuing and are close to completely hardwiring. So definition of vision is when you imagine a future condition broader in scope than a goal. It's when you seek to create an unquestionable value in a unparalleled way and reinvent how it becomes business. In other words, we wanted it to be the way that we communicate not only with ourselves but with our clients. On page 8, you can read about why vision is important, and you can consider how these elements are apparent in the visions we just looked at, whether it be from Google and whether it be from the Amazons of the world. But what I want to do is take a look at in more depth the 3 different drivers crafting a vision. The first is that of exploration. So if you turn to page 9, you'll see the 2 different behavioral continuums. As you know, a continuum is something from one extreme to the next. And on this page and those following, you will see the customized results of where Dennard's leadership effectiveness are in each of those continuums. I will share with you that the further to the left takes more energy. The further to the right is the best practice. So, for instance, at a glance, you'll see that he's in the best practice on page 9 in remaining open and prioritizing the big picture. Everyone can develop their leadership effectiveness by learning some leadership best practices. 50% of the people have between 5 and 9 of the behaviors, however, on the left side, which means they have some leadership opportunity. So let's take a look at what does that continuum look like. At a glance, this slide shows the 3 different drivers: exploration, boldness, and testing assumptions, and then for each of those drivers, the 2 continuums. So that's what we're going to dig deeper into during this webinar. And I know it might be a little bit cumbersome, but I want you to kind of quasi-assess yourself as to where you feel you are in those areas. So let's take a look at the first driver. That is of exploration. The first continuum looks at, on one extreme, seeking closure, and on the other extreme, remaining open. By definition, as a leader, if you make decisions and finalize plans quickly, prefer not to revisit options, you would tend to be one who seeks closure, which is not optimum as an inspiring leader. If you remain open, you are more willing as a leader to entertain new ideas and possibilities and not hurry to finalize the plans. And I'll give you an example. This week, I was conducting a train-the-trainer at an organization, and I had followed up with the team as to how they were going to roll out this particular training to the organization. And they created an idea or a strategy that was much different than the way that I originally thought, and my initial reaction was to disagree. But I thought, you know what? if I sat and considered their options, there's more than one way to skin a cat, they might have better ownership and customization in the solution, and therefore it could probably be better than my way. So as a leader, what you need to do is be willing to entertain and consider new ideas than to always force your ideas. The second behavioral continuum in the exploration is that of prioritizing details or prioritizing the big picture. So when you think about as a leader, a visionary leader, are you one who tends to micromanage, or do you tend to focus on the broad overall view of an idea or of a project? And again, I'm going to go back to our CRM project at Inspiring Solutions. We wanted to have something that managed our calendars, managed our contacts, and that was the two that were probably the most important for my application. But as Dana has worked with the organization for now almost 2 years, she wanted to come at it from a more marketing and a sales perspective. So she wanted to have something that integrated with our marketing and sales efforts. So once we looked at the overall aspect of the vision, we then needed to pursue the second driver, and that was a boldness. So take a look at page 10. 10, once again, illustrates by the dot that Denard is kind of halfway between cautious and adventurous. By definition, a leader who's cautious tends to minimize taking risk and uncertainty. However, the more adventurous leader enjoys the excitement of taking risks and are comfortable with the unknowns. Now, for those of you who have followed me on Facebook, and feel free, I would love to be your friend on Facebook. Go out, and today we also have a Inspiring Solutions page. I would love for you to go out and like our page because we continue to promote things that are coming down the pipe there. But if you've followed me on Facebook, you'll see that Dana and I more recently took our significant others on an adventure on a private jet. We were flying down to Fort Myers, and I was the co-pilot, and I didn't do a very good job because I didn't completely seal the doorway. And what that means in a private plane is we can launch, but unfortunately it becomes very cold and noisy. So there's a picture of Dana and her significant other, George, in the back of the plane, all bundled up because it was very cold and noisy. So the things that I get Dana into on our adventures as Thelma and Louise. But luckily, we arrived safely, and we are here to tell the story. But I tend to kind of be a little bit more extreme on my adventures than sometimes she's comfortable with. The second behavior of being bold is to the degree that you hold back or speak up. Those of you that may hesitate from saying something because you might be fearful of criticism or your credibility might be on the line, I'll challenge you to be willing to volunteer your bold ideas. Put your even crazy ideas share them in a team setting, because I welcome creative ideas. There's more than one way to complete a project, and I would encourage you to demonstrate or speak out, whether you're the leader or whether you're on the team, for people to hear your thoughts or ideas. And Tina says, yes, never a dull moment. The third driver in crafting a vision is testing your assumptions. I want to illustrate how in the airline business they failed miserably to test this innovation. Many of you may have been on a plane where there was a seat back phone. This was the airline's innovative idea of allowing their passengers to make phone calls while on a plane. Well, unfortunately, that idea came out the same time that cell phones did, and therefore, rather than to use the phone on the plane, people would much rather use their own cell phones. So therefore, that idea was a flop, a failure. Cost probably a lot of money, and when they had to redo the basic planes seats. So in the third continuum, you'll want to, on page 11, evaluate to what degree do you decide independently from research and development or getting feedback versus seeking counsel. The example of the CRM project that we embarked on, before I had Dana start our research, I went out to my mastermind group of peers and asked what CRM they tended to use, because I thought if they've gone down the same path that we're about to go down, why reinvent the wheel? And because our industry might be a little different than other industries, I wanted to use those that worked well for our setting. So we had to have something that worked in the office, but we also had to have something that worked in the field, because I do a lot of my communication and decision making from my handheld. The other behavioral continuum was that of pushing forward versus exploring implications. If you're a leader who prioritizes quick progress, find it difficult to be patient with careful evaluation, or are you one who tends to explore the implications, showing patience and evaluating ideas to determine potential benefits and drawbacks? And I think that that's probably something that I know that I need to practice more of, because it's important to look at the big picture. Even I will say some of the things that we have found out with the CRM that we chose aren't working as well as we would like, or at least from my perspective, they aren't working on my handheld as much as we like, so that could have been a drawback from our research. So let's review. When crafting a vision, you need to make sure that you explore your options, be bold and brave and take risks, be a little bit adventurous, and you also, however, need to test your assumptions to make sure that your vision or your solution is going to meet your needs. The second step that a leader needs to work on is building alignment. So there's a definition on page 12 of what alignment needs. And to teach this, I'll oftentimes in a classroom get two teams together, and one describes what an organization looks like when they are aligned around a vision, and the other group will take a look at what an organization or a team looks like when there is not a vision, or at least it's not understood. And when you really think about alignment, the definition on page 12 is when you get buy-in to the vision from those involved, from not only a task perspective, but from an emotional perspective, which means you not only have to understand what it means or why it's important, but you also take a look and hear out how people feel about the vision, because most likely there's going to be change. And typically, if you don't allow people to get comfortable with the change, your vision will not be accepted and ultimately not followed through on. So there again, on page 12, as an introduction for alignment, is the definition of why it's important. It tends to set the stage for effective implementation. It provides, like I said, a forum for people to express their concerns or ask questions. And it also, once understood, can generate excitement. So you can see that as an organization going through change, that's very important for engagement. Let's take a look at what are the steps in aligning your organization to make sure that it becomes reality. It does take continuous communication upward, so getting feedback from your team as to how they feel about some of the ideas, downward to clarify and understand and explain what's expected, as well as from a lateral perspective, because if you have an organization, like many that I work with, your department will need to make sure that it works in tandem or in collaboration with others. So you need to make sure that you consider how other people and departments are being affected. The overview of the continuums involved with the building alignment, like with the crafting of vision, there are three. The first driver is clarity, the second driver is dialogue, the third is inspiration. So let's dig deeper into each of those three drivers. The first driver is that of clarity. when you are looking at what it takes to be a clear communicator, on page 13, you'll see that Denard has some work to do because he's putting a lot of energy on the left side, which is not the best practice described on the right side. So as a leader, do you tend to communicate more with your own personal feelings and opinions versus explaining the rationale? In other words, communicating the facts, the research behind an idea or decision. In other words, why is this important? What is the research? Why would this solution be the best given our criteria? And the other behavior in clarity or communication would be to be aware of impromptu messaging. You tend not to invest energy in organizing what they say. They tend to just go to meetings or they will make announcements without much thought versus structured messaging. Do you tend to think before you speak? Do you organize what you're going to communicate, making it easier for other people to understand? The example that I will give to you is at Inspiring Solutions, I'm constantly asking for Dana and Sarah to create templates. Templates are layouts of documents. It could be a program description. It could be the instructions for these webinars. It could be the newsletters that we send out to you on a monthly basis. And we do that for two reasons. One is, from a readership perspective, it makes it easier for you to understand how to get information because there's some consistency. From an internal operational perspective, we know what kind of content we need to provide because we have a template to simply fill in. So that, again, is a best practice that I would encourage you as a leader or as an organization to think about using for both internal and external efficiency. The second driver in building alignment is that of dialogue. On page 14, you'll see, again, the two behavioral continuums. One is that of presenting information, and you can see that he's got a lot of work in this area, and that of challenging. So if you are a leader who tends to communicate new ideas and information without room for discussion, you tend to communicate just one way. You tend to tell versus ask, which would be the opposite end of the spectrum. Exchange of perspectives, encouraging dialogue around new ideas and information. When I teach leaders about meeting leadership, I use the word synergistic. I'd like for you as a leader to think about communicating synergistically, which means you have an idea of what you want to communicate, but you also allow people to express their thoughts, their concerns, or you might even put them on the agenda to ask questions or to present information so that it's not just a one-way communication. The other continuum to look at is, do you tend to challenge or are you more receptive? Leaders that challenge tend to respond with questions and skepticism to different points of view, oftentimes challenging people to disagree. And the other, being more receptive, is when you invite and appreciate the different points of view. And then the third driver of alignment is that of inspiration. As a leader, if you are going to inspire your team to follow or align themselves with your vision or with the agreed upon vision, you need to think about on page 15 how you get them excited. Are you more reserved? Now, we talked about in the first hour that this is also easy for you to think about from a DISC perspective. If you are a high D or a high I, you probably are less likely, you are probably more expressive than you are reserved, which means if you are by nature an S or a C, you probably display little emotion when you get excited. So you might need to kind of pep it up a little bit and get excited when you are trying to instill the importance or sell an idea to a team. Because the expressive leader tends to communicate in a more upbeat, open, and lively manner, which means that people will more likely to follow you. The other behavioral continuum of the inspiration is that of a style of matter of fact, where you communicate in the straightforward, practical, kind of a linear, here's what I think, here's what we need to do, versus more of an encouraging. So if you use an encouraging style of communication, you are going to inspire others to believe in the importance of their work. So in other words, you talk in their terms, not your terms, which I think if you're trying to engage a workplace, this is the style of leadership that followers or your team will respond best to. So let's review. If you are wanting to build alignment as a leader, you're going to need to make sure you use these 3 drivers on a regular basis. You're going to need to make sure you communicate clarity, have a synergistic dialogue in a manner that inspires others to take action. Because leaders must continually monitor and realign when a team might get off track and not compliant or aligned with the vision. And then the last step as a leader is to learn how to champion execution. On page 16, there's an introduction about execution from the standpoint that leadership tends to be from a one-to-many relationship, and that managers tend to communicate more on a day-to-day basis in working the execution. So what does that mean? I think that as a manager and as a leader, or whatever your position is, you have to demonstrate skills of a leader as well as that of a manager. In other words, leaders tend to think about, am I doing the right things in compliance with the vision or in compliance with the mission? And managers tend to say, am I doing things in the right way? In other words, am I in compliance with policies, procedures? So let's take a look at what that might mean to making a vision a reality. Think about a leader that you've worked with, and maybe it was your boss, maybe it was a project leader, and I'd like for you to think about what was that leader's role in communicating, creating, and executing a vision. And how was it they kept you or the team focused on the task at hand? Now, one of the things that they might do is to obtain commitment through these 3 drivers. So let's explore what it takes to establish and maintain momentum. On page 17 are once again the 2 different behavioral continuums. The first continuum takes a look at, is the leader more low-key or driven? And again, this kind of applies what you learn about yourself in the DISC model, but from a more leadership application. So a leader who's low-key tends to be more laid back, uncomfortable encouraging others to increase the pace. So they might miss deadlines as a result of that style of leadership. They might not hold people accountable because they aren't willing to confront. However, the best practice, as I mentioned, the best practices based on research is that of a driven leader, a leader who tends to urge others to move quickly. They can be annoyed when people lack that sense of urgency, and I know Dana can attest that sometimes I need to kind of pep up the pace because of either the nature of the work or maybe it's the pressing deadline or a client need. And then the second style or the second behavior for momentum is, are you more reactive to what happens, or do you tend to more initiate, intentionally action? So if you're one who takes action as a result of some event or problem, unlikely to seek no opportunities, you're one who kind of shows up to work to see what happens. Whereas an intentional or one leader who initiates tends to look at what are the problems I need to face and what are the opportunities that I need to seize based on the priorities of the day priorities of the project or the importance of the plan and goals. The second behavioral continuum of execution is that of structure. One way to teach structure is to think about that leader you were thinking about, and in what way does a leader provide structure during the execution phase? And what would happen if you didn't have structure? Now, let me give you kind of an organizational-wide philosophy I have, and what is it that I have from a project perspective. One of the best uses of my talent is from a cultural perspective. In other words, I understand what it takes to create a culture of excellence. That has a lot of moving parts. It has a strategic plan. It has standards of behaviors. It has job descriptions. It has a solid performance management system in place. And I can help your organization make sure that you have these as best practices. Secondly, then I will work with leadership to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what those goals are and what their role in aligning with the strategic plan. So what that means to you as a leader is, do you know what the strategic objectives are of your organization, and do you understand how your department helps contribute to those goals? Because if you are just doing your thing as a department without collaborating with other departments or understanding the importance of your strategic goals, you are not working effectively, you're not working efficiently, and as a leader, you are not being good stewards of the resources, your people, your talent, and your time. So on page 18, thinking about you as a leader on these two continuums. Do you tend to improvise, which means you tend to kind of figure things out as you go, or you do things that you want to do, not necessarily what you need to do? Or are you a type of leader that looks at an organized plan and looks at and understands what the expectation of your boss is and are comfortable at focusing on actions that will meet deadlines? I know today, before end of week, I need to wrap up this webinar. There's a number of things that we have in place that happen after each webinar. Dana has a structure follow-up that she will do. She'll upload the webinar recording on our website. She'll put it out on YouTube. She'll do a follow-up with evaluations that happen. So we've streamlined this structure so that for each month, I don't have to ask her to do things. She knows what she needs to do. I know what I need to do, so we all collaborate in an efficient, effective manner. The second behavior of structure is the first impressions. A unappropriate leader takes a look at whatever their gut says. And I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing, because I do tend to rely on my gut sometimes to make decisions. But I do think that there's great merit, especially in the complexity of an organization, to analyze in depth a situation before you make a decision. So in other words, I like data. Dana knows that we have a dashboard in our strategic plan. And each quarter, we update specific measures that tell us, are we on track for achieving our strategic plan? And then the last driver of the last step, and I know this is kind of cumbersome, but it does start to make sense the more you think about it. And again, by having you actually fill out one of these profiles, I think it'll make even more sense when it's customized to you, and that is of feedback. So if you want feedback on you as a leader, this is a great tool to do so. So feel free to ask Dana to administer it for you or your leadership team. So on page 19, the two continuums about feedback. First is that of, are you a leader who wants to maintain harmony or willing to address problems? If you are a leader who wants to keep a calm, peaceful environment without ruffling feathers, or are you someone who is comfortable addressing problems in a straightforward manner? In October, Dana is going to be conducting the webinar because I'm going to be actually in Phoenix. She just told me this morning that I am producing conflict for her, but I know that she will do it in a very productive manner. But she's going to teach you how to make conflict productive from the inside out. In other words, if you are someone who does not like conflict, make sure that you sign up for the October webinar because she's going to help you understand why you may feel the way you do about conflict, but why in the workplace, why in a relationship is conflict so important. And then the last behavioral continuum is that of offering less praise or more praise. In other words, are you comfortable not only giving positive praise for people that have made a positive contribution, as well as are you willing to help redirect people that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing? So that gives you an idea of all of the different continuums of those three different steps of the three drivers. And I know it's a language in amongst itself, but it's just a very effective leadership tool. So in closing, I want to kind of summarize the championing execution takes when you put momentum, structure, and feedback, and it really does help leaders at all levels of the organization obtain commitment and support to turning your vision into reality. Now, as a leader, as you know, you've got great strengths that you can draw upon for your effectiveness, but you also have some challenges, and I truly believe that this tool can help you identify what your strengths are. So on page 20, you'll see from Denard's results his three areas that he speaks out, he initiates, and he's expressive. And then starting on page 21 through 23, where his greatest challenges are. So in one area, as I mentioned, he tends to be challenging. He needs to be more receptive in hearing people's ideas. On page 22, he also tends to present information versus that synergistic approach that we were talking about. When I saw, who was it, Tiffany, likes the term synergistic. So obviously, Denard needs to learn how to facilitate conversations in that manner. And then the last he needs to look at on page 23 is that of he tends to not give feedback. So that's going to be an opportunity for him as his leadership effectiveness. So when we use this as a tool, we'll encourage each leader to write out an action plan for further developing their strengths and overcoming their weaknesses or their challenges. If you would like more information, one of the handouts that we've given you, is a brochure that further describes not only the profile that you can use, but also there's some additional reports that you can use. There's one at no cost that if you do this from a leadership team perspective, you can have the dots on a one map so you can see how your style compares to your coworkers or your peers. And that's really interesting because based on your leadership team, you'll understand not only how your leaders work, but you can understand how you should adapt and work best with other styles and when you're collaborating, as well as what you might need to do to have a balanced perspective adapting for a complete style. So there is also a facilitator group report and a culture report, and that gives narrative of what that would mean if you are a group of leaders, what that means to your culture and what that means to your organization and its employees. So if you'd like, again, more information, feel free to follow up and ask Dana for a sample, or better yet, if you'd like us to bring this to your organization, we'd be happy to help you. John Maxwell said that leaders must be close enough to relate to others, but far enough ahead to motivate them. And I hope I've motivated you today as a leader to learn how you can be more effective in using this tool. And if you've got questions, feel free to ask. We'd love to understand what your challenges are as a leader or as an organization with some inspiring solutions. And then once again, the last resource we gave to you are our upcoming webinars. The next one I'm excited about because you are going to be the first to see a brand new video. We actually gave a sneak preview last night out on Facebook, so if you're interested, you can get a sneak preview out on my Facebook page, and we'll put it out on Inspiring Solutions as well. But it's a video program to help you not let those bad apples make you go bananas. In October, like I mentioned, Dana's going to roll out and teach you how to use the productive conflict profile. In November, stopping the noise, how to gain control of your life by gaining control of your attitude. And then in December, once again, how to discover to help people get along and get things done. So with that, once again, please give us feedback. We only can make this experience better for you and others in the future based on what you share for suggestions, not only for content, but for your comments. So I leave you again with our team thanking you for joining us today. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to your participation in future webinars. Bye for now.